Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Conrad Washington, and I'm the director for the VA Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. And I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you all taking time to stop by and chat with us and as we share information with you. And as a note, I will share with you, many of you probably are following that our office name has changed or will change based on the recent executive order, and you are correct. And we will provide more information shortly on that. So thank you for your patience as we transition into a new name with the same type of service that we provide. I will be your moderator today, and I'll try not to mess it up too bad as my outreach specialist is not here, and she's very good at this. So show me some grace. I appreciate it. So let me go through this script she's provided for me. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box to the right of your screen. We will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenters will provide a verbal response. The presentation today is absolutely available and will be provided to each one of you that registered and joined this webinar. As a reminder and a note, this is a live recording. So I want to take some time to thank our presenters, Mr. Sean Clark. He's the National Director for the VA Justice Program at Veterans Health Administration. Thank you, Sean, appreciate you. And Madolyn Gingell, hope I didn't mess your name up, ma'am. She's the National Coordinator for the legal services here at the VA within the Veteran Health Administration. Thank you both for this collaboration. So with that being said, let me see where we are here. My bio is on the screen, you can read it. And then here we have Sean. You can take a look at his bio for those who are not on the computer. I will try to read some of his bio. Bear with me, Sean. He's a JD, serves as the National Director for the Veteran Justice Program in the VA. Together, those programs are a prevention-oriented component of VA's effort to prevent and end homelessness among veterans, targeting the close relationship between incarceration and homelessness. Their mission also includes facilitating veterans' access to legal services, including by supporting the growing number of free legal clinics operating in VA facilities. Mr. Clark joined the VA in 2007 as a Presidential Management Fellow. He has also served as a Special Assistant United States Attorney in Washington, D.C. He earned his JD from William Mary School of Law. So guess what? We have a very smart person today. So Sean, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. And I think I'm supposed to give you the mic right now. Is that right, Mr. Morales? I know. I'm letting everyone behind the curtain. So I think the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Washington, and to everyone.
I take that back, Sean. I'm supposed to introduce the next speaker as well. So next slide. Thank you. Sorry. I told you I'm going to mess it up. I knew I would. I'm going to introduce Madolyn Gingell. She's the National Coordinator for Legal Services Veterans Justice Program, as I mentioned, a licensed clinical social worker, national coordinator, as I mentioned. Her focus is on the promotion of medical legal partnerships in VA-affiliated legal clinics throughout the VHA, as well as oversight of the newly authorized federal grant program that provide legal services to veterans, which is important. So thank you, ma'am, for being here. We appreciate you. Next slide. Yeah. Now, I think the floor is yours now.
All right, sir. Well, thank you very much. And once again, to everyone out there who joined the discussion this afternoon, really looking forward to the chance to share with you a bit about what we do in the justice programs, and including hopefully some things that you haven't heard before, even if you are familiar with us to one degree or another, and the work that our specialists do across the country with veterans who are involved with various different parts of the legal system. So I came on camera, just wanted to say hello to everyone. I am going to come off to help with bandwidth on what I understand is a large call, which of course is fantastic. But I will pop off here. And again, as Mr. Washington said, a little behind the camera stuff as I talk myself through the tech elements of all this. But I will get us going with our slide presentation. And I'll start off just by hitting a few of the high points of what we hope to cover this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining from. We've got a few main objectives. So discussing the needs of veterans who are involved with the justice system as a broader population, and of course, how VA works to address those needs and make sure that we're able to provide justice-involved veterans access to everything that VA has or can coordinate that may be of use to them. We want to describe the resources that are available to identify veterans within the criminal justice system. That, of course, is critical. We can't serve veterans within a broader population if we don't know where they are, where the veterans are in a larger criminal justice population. Importantly, we want to talk about connecting and specifically how to connect with specialists in our program who work on the front lines, so to speak, across the criminal justice system. So who are doing the work day in and day out of going in to criminal justice facilities, connecting with justice-involved veterans, and helping them access the services that are going to be helpful to them. And then last but not least, and this will be primarily my colleague, Ms. Gingell's end of things, we're talking about legal services and specifically some new resources that are available through VA and our partner organizations to address a wider variety of legal issues for veterans. So not just those that concern their involvement with the criminal justice system, but increasingly also civil legal needs that can have massive impacts on someone's life and really hold them back. And so we've got some exciting new resources to share that are beneficial in that direction. So a very quick tour of where we're hoping to head this afternoon, and we'll dive right in and start out by describing the population a bit. I think important to get grounded here. The one takeaway from what is a kind of a visually busy slide right here is that this is a high need population. And when you look at several dimensions, you really see that pop out. Homelessness is the first one that I'll mention here. And this drives where we sit within the larger organization of VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs. We are a part of the homeless programs in the Veterans Health Administration. And this is why that is, because incarceration is such a powerful predictor of homelessness. And this is a relationship that really flows in both directions. Of course, being homeless and the day-to-day experience of being homeless can bring someone into contact, and I would say does more often than not, with law enforcement and other first responders. That is the nature of being unsheltered homeless, is having those sorts of contacts. But it does flow in both directions. We see that show up in our program data, as some of these sub-bullets can attest. So of the veterans who our specialists saw in fiscal year 2023, about a third of those veterans were homeless at the time, or they were being served by one of the VA homeless programs. 27% of incarcerated veterans reported being homeless in the year prior to their arrest. So again, speaking to that close relationship that I summarized there at the top. And of course, VA remains committed to addressing and ultimately ending homelessness among veterans. And that, again, is a part of why we're doing this work and through the justice programs, and of course, why VA is putting so many other valuable resources behind this effort, other homeless programs that you may be familiar with. So homelessness, of course, is not the only risk that justice involvement can introduce or can make worse for veterans. We also see a high prevalence of clinical needs in this population. So about 2/3 of the veterans who we serve in the justice programs have a mental health diagnosis, and just under half have a substance use disorder diagnosis. About the same number, again, just under half, have both. So they're duly diagnosed, have both a mental health and a substance use disorder diagnosis. Fortunately, these are issues that VA is well equipped to address for veterans who can come to us for healthcare. And I'll talk a bit more about that here very shortly. But this is a very prominent feature of the population that we're aiming to serve. Last but not least, and tragically, justice-involved veterans are at heightened risk for the most powerful negative outcome of all. And we see here the citation describes their increased risk for suicide compared to veterans who are not justice involved. There's more detail about this coming up next. This is excuse me. Sorry, just running into looks like I've lost the ability to advance us to the next slide here. I apologize for that. Oh, here we are. Thank you. The more detail about suicide risk for justice-involved veterans. This information comes from VA's annual report on veteran suicide, and what we see here is that in 2021, veterans who were served in our programs saw a more than 10% increase in their suicide rate compared to 2020. Justice-involved veterans are not the only disproportionately impacted group, as summarized in that report. We have those listed here on the side of the slide as well, but they are, again, one of the most prominently impacted groups that VA's researchers found when combing through the data on veteran suicide. So that is a very prominent issue for us, and again, you couldn't have a more powerful motivating factor when it comes to helping veterans access services that are responsive to their needs, knowing what's at stake, and effectively the ultimate negative outcome. So that, I think, introduces a certain gravity to the work and a sense of the stakes involved. So if we could advance to the next slide, please. This is a visual representation of those data, just showing that trend over time. The red line on this graph represents veterans who have been in contact with our programs, with veterans justice programs here in the VA. And the blue line is the suicide rate for other veterans, all other veterans. Again, without being overly redundant, just wanted to introduce this. Sometimes it's easier to grasp with a visual in hand. And again, looking at that period kind of around the opening of the COVID pandemic, we saw a major spike in this rate for veterans who have contact with our programs. That's of grave concern. And I'll say this elevated trend has been borne out in VA's most recent annual report on veteran suicide, which was released just a couple of months ago. The rate remains elevated, so there is lots of work to do. We could advance to the next slide, please. Our mission and vision statement appear here, and listening to someone read a mission statement is not my idea of a good time, and it's probably not yours either, so I don't intend to do that for you. But I did want to include this just so that you get a sense of who we are and what we're aiming to do. And I think we can do that most effectively by just pulling out a couple of key words from the mission statement and talking a little bit about what that means in practice. So on the mission statement, you'll see here, we are identifying justice-involved veterans, conducting outreach to connect with them, and it's in order to facilitate access, and that access is the key concept here. The other parts are important as well. Identification, like I mentioned, we've got to know who we're looking for. Contacting them through outreach, by definition, this is a population that certainly if you are incarcerated in a prison or a jail at the moment, you're not able to reach out and ask for help to connect with services on your own. So we've got to help make that happen for you. But the point of it all is access to VA services, and again, at the earliest possible point. Outreach for us isn't an end in itself. We need to make sure that the second part of this equation comes together, and that connection to responsive services actually happens. So we go into these prison and jail facilities, we work in veterans treatment courts and in other settings, but does that translate into access to care that'll help justice-involved veterans address what may be underlying issues and that are going to help them build a foundation of stability under them and turn things around. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. We've got some encouraging data on that. But again, access to care is the point of it all. Veterans Justice Programs, and here specifically, this means our specialists, so the frontline clinical staff at the VA medical centers across the country, are doing this by building and maintaining partnerships between VA and key elements of the criminal justice system. So we're a bit unique when you look across VA and the Veterans Health Administration in particular, because we don't have, we're doing our work in settings over which we don't have control. We're guests everywhere that we go in this program. So unlike a typical VA clinical program operating at the medical center with structured hours and a fairly predictable understanding of how a day or a week or a month is going to go in terms of scheduled appointments, our specialists have to go out, find veterans where they are, and to do that by getting access to facilities that we don't control and that we don't have a right of access to. So this is all partnership-driven work. Again, a concept that a group like this is very familiar with and understands the importance of. I feel very confident in saying that. This is all about partnership, all about shared goals. And we're in the very fortunate position that criminal justice agencies do share our goal of helping to make sure that veterans are identified and connected with responsive services at the earliest possible point. I don't think it is a coincidence that veterans are heavily represented in the ranks of the criminal justice workforce and its leadership. I do think that's an important factor. I think that helps open doors for our specialists to be able to connect with justice-involved veterans across the system. So a very quick pass through our mission statement, but again, that's what we're about. Doing this outreach, helping veterans access care, and doing it through partnership, because that's the way it has to be done. If we could move to the next slide, please. This, again, following up the words with a visual representation. This will be too small for you to see and probably to make much of. This is just a very simple graphic breakdown of the criminal justice system and its major components. And the point of this resource that was developed by colleagues of ours over at a training arm of the Department of Justice. The point of this was to show where and how veteran-specific resources can fit into these different settings, these different parts of the criminal justice process. Our services, our programs are set up to be able to offer an intervention at each one of these different points. So again, won't dwell on this because you can't really see it, and I apologize for that. But this is available through the National Institute of Corrections and can be a helpful guide if that's something that you're interested in addition to some other resources that we'll get to in just a bit. But for now, I think if we could move on to the next slide. Veterans Justice Programs, the clue's in our name, that there are more than one. The first of those is Veterans Justice Outreach, or VJO. And here we've got some basic information about what the work of this program looks like and some statistics about what it all amounts to when you look across the system. We have over 500 staff operating across all the VA medical centers in the United States. These specialists are working at what we call the front end of the criminal justice system, so the earlier stages. They are in contact with local law enforcement agencies, often with the ability to provide some training for them about what resources are available through local VA outlets. They are going into local jails, conducting outreach in those facilities, again, with the goal of linking veterans to VA care post-release. They're also working in the court system, and in particular in veterans treatment courts. I'll talk a bit about those in just a moment. And you see here some of the numbers behind that. So these 500 or so staff are conducting outreach in over 2,000 local jail facilities across the country. We're not everywhere. There are more than 3,000 counties in the United States, but for this number of individuals and with as much distance to cover as that entails, this number, we're proud to say, is growing and is significant, a significant share of all the jurisdictions at the county level across the United States. And we served nearly 45,000 veterans in the VJO program last year. So we'll move to the next slide, which is the other original component of the Veterans Justice Program's Healthcare for Reentry Veterans, or HCRV. And HCRV is structurally very simple. It is the prison outreach program. The intent is behind it is the same as that behind VJO. We want to connect with veterans where they are in these criminal justice settings, specifically state and federal prisons, and help them access VA care at the earliest possible point. Almost always in the HCRV context, that means post-release. And I'll talk in just a moment about why that is. But this work is a little bit less varied than what we see in VJO, which can happen in several different locations. HCRV is really all about prisons and working with veterans after they have spent a significant period incarcerated and are preparing to reenter the community. Those are difficult transitions, especially when they are happening after a period of many years. There's a lot to rebuild. There's a lot to relearn, in some cases to learn for the first time. Think about how the job search process has changed from the way that it looked before cell phones existed, to cite just one example. And there are many others besides. But a few numbers here. This is a relatively smaller component of the VJP than we see on the VJO side, but over 1,000 state and federal prisons covered through this outreach, and over 10,500 incarcerated veterans served in the last fiscal year. On the next slide, we'll have a little bit more detail about the issue that I just mentioned and why in the HCRV context and in prisons specifically, access to care has to wait until after a veteran is released from incarceration. So I always like to start with what we can provide as an agency for veterans who are justice involved. Regardless of where a justice-involved veteran is today, we can serve him or her through outreach. We can make an initial clinical assessment of what the veteran's clinical needs, treatment needs are likely to be. And in many cases, we can start the process of getting the veteran linked to VA care, whether that's setting up a screening appointment, in many cases post-release, making an appointment for a veteran who may have already been established with care and is maybe serving a brief period in a local jail. A specialist may be able to make an appointment for him or her to hit the ground running, so to speak, getting reestablished with care prior to release. But we are not able to provide treatment to veterans while they are incarcerated. And the reason for that is the regulation that's listed here on the slide. Essentially, when a veteran's incarcerated, whoever is holding him or her in custody has the legal duty to provide for their care. As a result of that, that veteran is temporarily excluded from what we call the medical benefits package. Essentially, it's the full list of treatment services that our healthcare system offers. And again, that's a temporary suspension. It's not a permanent change in eligibility. And it's done because of the existence of that legal duty that incarcerating authority has. But again, always like to begin and end with what we can do for justice-involved veterans. And what we can do for justice-involved veterans who aren't incarcerated is anything that they're eligible for in the VA healthcare system. So one persistent misunderstanding that we hear about justice involvement and its impact on eligibility is that that it applies to veterans while they're not incarcerated. That a conviction of a felony, for example, in the past, may make a veteran ineligible for VA healthcare if they otherwise would have been. That's not the case. Unless a veteran is a fugitive felon, and that is a very rare circumstance where there is an open warrant for a felony offense. And there are indicators of flight. As you can imagine, that's not a very common scenario, but that does make a veteran ineligible for VA healthcare and for any other federally administered benefit. But short of that, a criminal history, a pending charge, the fact that someone is on house arrest, under probation supervision, they are under another form of supervision by a local court, none of those make a veteran ineligible for VA healthcare. So we always like to emphasize that. Unless the veteran is behind bars today, the fact of his or her justice involvement does not change their eligibility for VA care. If we could move to the next slide. If you are familiar with the work that we do in the Veterans Justice Programs, there's a good chance that it's because you have heard about or maybe are involved with or support a Veterans Treatment Court. These are a very popular and quickly expanding new model of courts to address the issues faced by veterans who have clinical needs and have entered the criminal justice system, but for whom a different approach is possible and may be beneficial. If you don't know veterans treatment courts, but you're familiar with drug or mental health courts, if those are operating in your community, then you certainly understand the basic concept. This is a non-adversarial approach, unlike the traditional criminal justice process. It is all about surrounding the veteran participant with clinical treatment, often offered through the VA, but potentially also from community providers, but also other supportive services, and critically, support from volunteer veteran mentors who are exactly what they sound like. Veterans from the community, in many cases affiliated with veteran service organizations, with faith-based groups, other organizations that are showing up for their fellow veterans who are struggling and who are going through a difficult process. These veterans treatment courts often take a year or more to complete. But at the end of that process, that includes engaging with treatment, fulfilling typically a long list of other conditions, a veteran may have the ability to have a charge dismissed, or if not, then certainly to avoid whatever the traditional penalty would have been, be that incarceration or another consequence that could have a significant negative impact on their stability. Ability to function in the community. VA is a proud partner to and contributor to veterans treatment courts, has been since the beginning. The very first one of those that was established in Buffalo, New York back in 2008, VA was at the table. In fact, the planning meeting to get that court started happened at the VA Medical Center in Buffalo, New York. Our VJO specialists serve as members of the treatment team. They work with the judge, with the attorneys, with the probation departments, with the other partners who are involved in these treatment courts, and they're the liaison between the VA healthcare system and these courts. They help facilitate access to care for the veterans who participate in the courts, and they keep the judge apprised of what's going on with the veterans treatment over time. So the judge can make decisions about how that case is going to proceed as the veteran progresses through the different stages of the program, and again, hopefully ultimately proceeding toward graduation and the resolution of that charge. These courts are not VAs. They're not we are not in a position of directing them, of setting their eligibility criteria. But again, just as the case for so many of the settings where we do our work in the justice programs, this is a partnership that we are an important contributor to, but are not in charge of. But again, very proud to be as involved with veterans treatment courts as we are and have been through the life of those courts and of our program. We could move to the next slide, please. Deflection. So veterans treatment courts are for individuals who, as I mentioned, you've already entered, you've been arrested, charged, and it's determined that you have a type of charge and a criminal history, and you meet other criteria that make you eligible for a veterans treatment court opportunity. One question that an increasing number of communities are asking is whether there aren't earlier opportunities to intervene and to facilitate that access to treatment, potentially with fewer negative collateral consequences. And that's where we see this concept of deflection emerging and really beginning to take off. It is working with, in many cases, some of the same partners that you see in veterans treatment courts or in other interventions happening in criminal justice settings. But again, the idea is that it is at the earliest possible point. And this is a pre-arrest mode of engaging someone. So potentially offering the ability to avoid so many negative collateral consequences that come from arrest and incarceration, even brief incarceration. This model, again, relative to veterans treatment courts, is in its earlier stages, but it is one that we see a tremendous amount of potential in. and that VA is, I'm proud to say, investing in through training that we've conducted with VA police and with VA clinicians at every VA medical center across the country. We want to make sure that our facilities are well equipped to work with these deflection initiatives and offer a pathway into VA care, again, for veterans without them having to enter the criminal justice system in the first place, when the criminal justice agencies who do the responding determine that that's an appropriate course of action. But again, our theme, really rather than imposing a model or a particular cookie cutter type approach on very different communities across the United States, our message, the theme of it, is that we're here to partner, and the details of that can look different operationally based on what works for you, our community partners. But for us, it's all about ensuring that veterans get identified and that they get linked to care at the earliest possible point. And that's as true in the deflection space as it is in any of the others that I've been talking about. We move to the next slide. I believe that also describes VA's role. And again, this theme really runs through all these different settings. We're there to make sure that there's a smooth linkage between the initial intervention and that veteran's point of accessing VA care that's responsive to their needs. That's as true in deflection as it is in veterans treatment courts or anywhere else. But again, this is still taking shape and the models are still developing. We could move to the next slide. Again, I mentioned, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with VA and its healthcare system and what it has to offer. But I like to include this information to back up the point I made earlier that outreach isn't an end in itself, and that what happens on the back end is at least as important. What are we able to link veterans to, and how effective are we at doing that? So I won't read all these statistics to you, but of course we are the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States, offering care for veterans at many, many points of care across the community. We can move to the next slide. We've got some good news about the results of all of this work. So fiscal year 2024, the year that just concluded a few months ago, we see that 92% of the veterans who we served in VJO who had mental health diagnoses had at least one visit with a VHA mental health provider. And on the substance use disorder side, 69% of veterans with that diagnosis had at least one substance use disorder visit in VHA. So again, work to do there as well. But I think the takeaway point from that is that outreach contact with one of our specialists translates into access to VA healthcare for the issues that a veteran has and receives a diagnosis for at high rates. And so we're very encouraged by that the basic A to B function, getting a justice-involved veteran from point A in the criminal justice system to point B, responsive VA care, that connection is being made following outreach by our staff. We could move to the next slide. I believe this will take me to what may be the most important one of all, how to connect with our staff. So you'll see that there's a link here for the VJO program, a link for HCRV as well. If you're not familiar with the staff who perform these roles in your community, I would encourage you to check these links out and reach out. We have contact information for these specialists posted on the website. You are able to reach out to them directly from our websites. And again, start that conversation, see what might be possible. If you are not familiar with veterans treatment courts in your communities, this can be a great place to start, but you're interested in learning more, potentially pitching in that direction, reaching out to the VJO specialist who serves your community is a great place to start. And that's just one example. So again, I'll commend this to you. Please don't hesitate to get in touch and to see what might be possible. So if we move to the next slide, I believe this concludes my portion. And Mr. Washington, sir, I will hand it back to you. And thank you everyone for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate you. Great information, great presentation. Very, very informative. We're going to shift a little bit here, everyone, to Madolyn. Madolyn, thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Again, I'll just read a little portion of her. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's the national coordinator of the Legal Services for Veteran Program. Madolyn's focus is the promotion of medical legal partnerships and VA-affiliated legal clinics throughout the VHA, and as well as oversight of the newly authorized federal grant programs that provide legal service to veterans. Madolyn, ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Washington, and thank you everyone on the call today. Appreciate your time, and I hope you find the information beneficial. Next slide, please. Great, one more. So I always like to start with just a brief kind of background on why we're even talking about legal services for veterans, why it's important to have this discussion and really to gain some insight. So we know that legal issues present a specific set of social determinants of health for veterans. So like in other words, it means like legal issues are those non-medical factors that can impact overall health and welfare. And some of you may also know that access to legal services has been a long-standing need amongst the veterans experiencing homelessness, as we consistently hear in the challenge survey results. And that's an annual survey that's issued through the Veterans Justice Programs. It's really the voice of the homeless veteran or of that community provider serving our veterans that are struggling with homelessness. We also know that legal and financial needs have been identified as risk factors for suicide. So it's important. We need to talk about legal services. We need to help our veterans gain access to legal services. I feel that it's also very important to recognize that research has shown that connecting veterans with legal services in conjunction with VA healthcare services can have a positive impact in their overall health and well-being. And I share that with you because that's really a fundamental piece of the Legal Services for Veterans program, which we refer to as LSV. So as you can see on the screen here, we have some main focus areas in LSV. And the first is provide outreach and training, really to increase awareness of veterans' need for equitable access to legal services. Another focus area is to promote and grow the pro bono medical legal partnership model throughout the VHA, and I'll touch upon that. And then the third area is to establish and administer new grant authorities, specifically for the provision of legal services to veterans. And of course, as already mentioned, the LSV program is within the Veterans Justice Programs, and we are under the umbrella of the VA National Homeless Programs Office. Next slide, please. So for those that are not as familiar with a medical legal partnership, or an MLP as we refer to it, it's a collaboration between legal service providers and VA healthcare staff who are co-located at a VHA site, at a VA medical center, vet center, outpatient clinic. These attorneys or paralegals who are community partners, they are essentially embedded with the VA healthcare team. These interdisciplinary teams, they work together really with the focus of resolving unaddressed legal issues that impact the veteran's health. These pro bono legal services are provided on like predetermined days and times, so it's already set. And this is important because it helps promote access and it establishes that needed dependability and the trust. So the veterans know when the attorney or the paralegal will be on site. Of course, the primary focus of these MLPs is for veteran-centric care, but there are many other notable benefits of these partnerships. One very important one is the sharing of information across disciplines, right? And this really it helps in gaining insight and awareness, but it's done in an approach that's consistent with trauma-informed care, right? We recognize that these are very sensitive subjects, but we also recognize the expertise amongst different disciplines. The key with the VA medical legal partnerships is that it's more than just a referral. It is truly a collaborative approach to care. This is not listing legal service providers on a piece of paper and handing it to a veteran. These are disciplines, these are professionals working together in unison to help the veteran address these needs. Now, we also have VA affiliated legal clinics. And they also provide legal services or sometimes just legal education to veterans. They're usually provided on site, but they don't have to be on site. And the main difference between a legal clinic and an MLP is that a legal clinic is less formal than an MLP, and the legal service provider is not necessarily embedded with the healthcare team. And also these offerings they usually occur less frequently or less regularly. They're still very valuable, still very helpful to our veterans. Both MLPs and legal clinics, they primarily focus on civil legal services, and there is no charge or fee to veteran clients. So they are not charged at all. This is pro bono. It is done for free. Currently, the VA has approximately 60 established medical legal partnerships across the country, with well over 120 of the less formal legal clinics. You can see on the screen there is a link to that listing, and that link is also on the LSV website, which I believe we have provided to you at the end of this slide deck. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to switch gears and just talk about our grant-funded legal services. This screen shows just like a high-level overview of our two different VA legal service grant programs. The one on the right, Legal Services for Veterans Assistance with Access to VA Programs, we refer to as LSVA. The intent of this proposed grant program is strictly for legal assistance to help improve a former service member's military discharge or characterization of discharge. Of course, the ultimate goal is here to help the veteran become eligible for VA benefits. Now, we just still have a proposed rule on this grant. It was published in the Federal Register, and we are working with our internal partners on the final rule. Once the final rule is published, then we will have an open application period. So LSVA is still in the works, but you can see what we have estimated. We hope at some point to be able to award 85 grants. But again, this is all still being still in the works a little bit, LSVA. Now on the left side of your screen is LSVH, Legal Services for Homeless Veterans and Veterans at Risk for Homelessness Grant Program. So we are currently in our second grant cycle for LSVH, and the intent for LSVH is simply to address unmet legal needs that create barriers to housing stability for eligible veterans. And I'll go into much more detail about LSVH since this is our current grant program. And I can talk a little more about those specific services and hopefully something that may be helpful for those that you serve, or if you work for an organization that may be interested for future application period. Next slide, please. So the key intent for the Legal Services for Homeless Veterans and Veterans at Risk for Homelessness grant, as I mentioned, is the direct provision of legal services. So this is not a transitional housing grant or a case management grant. If you are familiar with the SSVF grant that has a legal service component, this is different and distinct from SSVF. These grantees with LSVH are public or nonprofit private entities. So these are not VA attorneys. These are not VA employees. They are expected to provide legal services that are relevant to issues that interfere with the veteran's ability to obtain or retain permanent housing. For the veterans that are served through these grantees, there is no income requirement. So there's no income threshold that they must be under, no income level requirement at all. Another key fact about this grant is that at least 10% of the funding must be utilized to provide legal services to women veterans. As I mentioned, we're currently in our second grant cycle. We have 108 grantees serving eligible veterans across 47 states, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. And we do have a grantee listing. Again, the link is on our website, which we will provide to you at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So this is a busy slide. I apologize, a lot of words, but I think it provides a great overview, especially if you want to go back and reference this. And this overview is of the allowable types of legal services that our grantees can provide using this grant funding, using this federal funding. So as I mentioned, right, this is really to address those unmet legal needs that present barriers to housing. So of course, housing law is covered under this grant. And as it says, as you can read on the slide, like eviction defense, we hear a lot about representation in landlord-tenant cases, foreclosure cases. This also covers family law. In addition to child support and custody, divorce, we're also covering guardianships when needed and matters related to family law that, again, can impact housing. Income support, legal assistance with income support is covered under the grant, and that's assistance in obtaining public benefits. So that could be state, local, federal, and or VA benefits. There is some coverage for criminal defense, however, it is very limited, and the situation must be related to housing or homelessness. So think of like a request to expunge or seal a criminal record so an individual can get leased up or can rent. But it's the criminal defense is very limited. I just want to be very transparent about that. The grant will also cover requests for military discharge upgrades, and that's legal assistance in preparing and submitting the request. Of course, as we all know, the VA does not make the determination to change a discharge status. But this grant program, these legal services will certainly help an individual preparing and submitting that request. And then some other types of legal services covered are protective orders or other matters related to domestic or intimate partner violence, access to healthcare, consumer law matters, like think of debt collection, garnishments, or fraud, identity theft, tax issues, and of course, employment law matters. I do like to just let everyone know that not all grantees provide all types of legal services. We recognize that our grantees differ in size and certainly differ in the types of law that they are proficient in providing. Next slide, please. So as far as who can be served through this funding, our eligibility is twofold. So the first part of that is that they essentially must be an individual who served 24 months active duty and was discharged under conditions other than dishonorable. Now, if they did not meet that 24 months active duty, like that, the time served, we do have some carve outs for that. And the LSVH grantees are well versed in what those carve outs are. But just as a rule of thumb, it's 24 months active duty with discharge other than dishonorable. The second prong is that if the veteran is experiencing homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. Now, for the purpose of this grant, we took a very broad approach to the definition of at risk. It's similar to other homeless program office grant programs, but we did expand it in a couple areas. So for instance, like situations involving intimate partner violence, or like if the veteran is living in housing that has characteristics that are associated with instability or an increased risk for homelessness. So think of like a veteran who may fear returning to their nighttime residence due to the threat of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. That would meet that at-risk definition. If a landlord shuts off the veteran's water or electricity, especially with weather conditions, and the veteran is unable to live there, they are at risk, right? It's important also to keep in mind here that the grant does not include legal services solely to a family member of a veteran or a caregiver of a veteran. Now, if the family member or caregiver would benefit, like if the veteran is being served and the caregiver or family member is under the same household, of course they could benefit, but they cannot be the client. The eligible veteran must be the client. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot of our first grant cycle, and just to brag for a minute about our grantees, who are phenomenal partners. None of this would happen without our grantees. Within our very first grant cycle, which was August 1st of 2023 through July 31st of 2024, our grantees served approximately 7,590 veterans. So well over 7,000 veterans received free legal services through this funding source. And of those, approximately 19% were women veterans, which is outstanding. Our goal was 10%, 19% were women veterans. At the time of the initial screening by the grantees, so at the time that the veteran first presented to them, over 75% of the veterans were at risk for homelessness, where the other 25% were literally homeless. So what we learned from the first year is that these services are really focusing on prevention, right? Which is wonderful. We want to keep our veterans housed. We want them to have that stability. We know that that's the best for them on so many different levels. It all takes us back to the social determinants of health, right? Within the first year, the 3 most requested types of legal services were housing law, legal assistance with income or benefits, and family law. And no surprise, the majority of the veterans served were male, of course, and they consider their primary residence as non-rural. So we're kind of looking into that a little bit for subsequent grant years, just to make sure that we are available to serve the veterans that really do need this as well. Next slide, please. And as we look to the future, I'm very excited to say that we are planning our next notice of funding opportunity, which is our application period. We do anticipate it in early 2025. Obviously, we are looking at applicants with a demonstrated focus on providing legal services to underserved veterans. We anticipate that the funding will be approximately 26 million per year, but we'll know that definitely when the notice of funding is posted. And probably the award amount per grantee will be around $250,000. But again, we'll know that once the notice of funding has been fully approved. But we do expect that the awards will be announced this summer. So again, the application period, we're hoping early 2025, and then the announcements of summer 2025. Next slide. And then these are just the resources that I had mentioned. The LSV website, which is public, so please feel free to share it. And then the grantee listing and the MLP listing. And if you or your colleagues have any questions after today, anything comes up, please feel free to email us at lsv@va.gov. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, Madolyn. We appreciate it. Look, Sean and Madolyn, I want to personally thank you in front of everyone who's viewing. We definitely appreciate your time. I keep saying that, but it's very important that I say that. Now we're right about at time, but I think I can get a couple questions in. And if we don't get to the questions, as I mentioned before, we will make sure that those questions get to the presenters and they will respond to you directly themselves. So let's go ahead and get started with the first question. It's from Tim Hill. He said, I'm a pastor. Thank you for your service, shepherd of your house, and retired colonel, currently working with a former colonel convicted of child pornography. He was simply removed from the U.S. Air Force rolls via a Civil War era rule, even though he had almost 25 years of honorable service. He is now on probation. I'm trying to help him gain access to VA help, mainly to prevent his suicide. I believe his crimes were driven by service-connected PTSD. Can you point me to any help?
Well, in that situation, I would suggest contacting the VJO specialist serving your community. I think, given the fact that the individual is on probation, again, there would be other details to sort through to determine eligibility, but the VJO specialist would be the place to start. And again, you can contact that individual through our website, which is included in the slides.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. We appreciate that. I hope that helps answer your question there, Pastor. Question 2 comes from John Farrow. Outreach. What is done to actually reach out where veterans are who do not go to VA clinic and are homeless or incarcerated? I think we all can answer that, but I'm not the expert.
Well, sure. So for incarcerated veterans, again, depending on the setting, the outreach is conducted through our VJO or our HCRV specialists. And for veterans who are homeless and have not otherwise had contact with VA services, we are just 2 of about 10 separate homeless programs in the VA. The original program under that umbrella is called Healthcare for Homeless Veterans, and that is the primary avenue for street outreach operated through the VA. So VA in every one of our facilities has these homeless programs, and again is partnering with community organizations and doing direct street outreach to connect with homeless veterans, regardless of whether they have come to one of our facilities for care. So again, we're a small part of a much larger picture in terms of VA's efforts to serve veterans who are homeless or at risk.
Thank you, Sean. So look, we don't have time to hit the other questions, but I do want to make a comment to an attendee named Kia Vaughn. You had a question, I responded to you privately. Please reach out to me and we can address your issue as well. To everyone else, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. Do me a favor and pass the word, just like good food. I hope you got some good food today, and you can share that the VA Center for Faith, we're doing webinars each month. Please share so that everyone can connect and join. So until that time, be blessed and take care of yourselves.